be here. My name is Mark Bernstein. I'm the CEO at Balto. And this 30 seconds is the only 30 seconds you're going to hear about Balto today. We are real-time guidance for contact centers, which means it's a technology that analyzes what salespeople and customer service people are saying live on their calls, and will give agents recommendations of how they can be as effective with the customer as possible. So I'm so excited to have the attention today on Eduardo and Marcie. And I will hand it over to Marcie to give her quick bio and background, and then we'll have Eduardo introduce himself and get into the panel discussion.
Thanks, Mark. Hey, everyone. I'm Marcie. I'm currently the operations director for Shopify's ecosystem, which is essentially our developer network that build integrations into Shopify and are usually present in our app store and theme store. But previously to that, I was our global director of customer support for about 7 years at Shopify. So you can ask us all types of questions. I built that team from about 20 people to about 2,200 people when I left the job. And we were running multi-channel, multilingual, 24/7, multiple continents of employees working from home for the last 5 years. And so chances are, if you have questions about anything, I've not only done it, but also screwed it up. So if you have any questions about anything like that, I'd love to have that conversation with you. You're next, Eduardo.
Thanks, Marcie. I'm Eduardo Nofuentes. As Julian said, I'm based in Australia, in Melbourne. So it's Friday for me already, 5 a.m. on Friday. I was born in Spain and I've lived in Australia for 16 years. So that's the accent probably that you can hear a bit funny, is that mix of Spanish and Australian accent. I'm the founder of 2 consultancies, one called the Agile Contact Centre, which helps contact centers work more efficiently and use some of the principles of Agile to run, and another one called New 21, which is a similar approach, but for the entire organization. I was very lucky to work with Marcie from 2017 until 2019, when Marcie was scaling that team that she was talking about from maybe 300 people to 2,000 people, and helping her maintain those agile mindsets that she wanted to put in place with her team at Shopify. And it was a great experience for me. So happy to share everything I know about Agile and about contact centers with you.
Wonderful. Marcie and Eduardo, thank you so much for the introductions, and we will kick things off. So I'll direct questions to either of you at any time, but anyone should feel free to jump in at any time and ask your questions or give your thoughts. So the first question here, Eduardo, is for you, and that is, can you give us a quick idea of what Agile is and why a contact center should care about it?
Yeah, sure. And I think Julian was asking a few questions before and how familiar people are. Some people that are familiar, maybe some people are not familiar at all. So maybe we can start with that, a bit of background about what Agile is. I should say I'm not an Agile evangelist by all means. So I think it's a great approach and a great mindset, but I also think that it has things that are not that great. So I'll share the good, the bad, and the ugly of Agile with everyone. So Agile, as you said, Mark, started in software development, started in product, in engineering, as a way of managing projects. Like, before Agile, most projects in big organizations, most IT projects were developed or managed, use like what is called the waterfall, approach. Like you do a lot of planning at the beginning, then you hope for the best, over the 12 or 14 months of implementation. And then at the end, you see what happened, right? And there were a group of software developers, of engineers, that they came together and they say, there must be a better way of doing this. And in 2001, so 20 years ago already, they created what's called the Agile Manifesto. It's something you can Google later. You can go and see what the Agile Manifesto is. But basically, it's saying that there should be a better way of doing IT projects, because all these the old way of doing projects is fail over and over. We go over time, we go over budget, customers don't get what we want, so there must be a better way. And as I say, they created the Agile Manifesto. The Agile Manifesto wasn't a step-by-step project management guide. It was 4 values and 12 principles. And some of those values and principles were things like individuals and interactions over processes and tools, or responding to change over following a plan. Some of the principles were around simplicity, self-organizing teams, continuous improvement, focus on the customer, so things like that. They were not saying this is a rule book on how you do it. There were more values and principles around how you should work when developing a project. I think the most important thing that they discuss or they come up with is sort of the mindsets behind this way of working. And the mindsets were around collaboration, communication, transparency, respect, trust, things like that. And all those mindsets, then you could see them in organizations by some of the tools and some of the practices that they use. A lot of visual management, and also a lot of post-it notes on the wall, a lot of conversations within the team, etc., etc. But it's not the tools what were important. What was important was the mindsets behind those tools and what they were trying to achieve, right? So this became very successful in the world of engineering. Like pretty much, any engineering team today, they're using Agile as the way to develop products and develop, the projects. And what happened is organizations started thinking, well, if this is working so well with engineering, how can we start doing this as well with other teams? So all the teams are starting to play and and try Agile, and we went into a wave, was what was called Agile at scales, where there were more than one Agile team in the corner in our organization. Suddenly we've got more teams working this way. And about probably 10 years ago, there was another wave where organizations as a whole started to think, how can we work not just the teams or the projects, but as an organization as a whole? How can we become more agile as an organization? And this term of organizational agility or business agility started to be very common in organizations. So my experience came in 2012 when, by accident, I've told you this story, Mark, before, but by accident, I ended up managing a contact center team in a software company here in Melbourne. I had no experience with contact centers before, and I joined this company, and the company were doing a lot of Agile in the software and engineering teams. And they say, hey, you need to manage now this contact center here in this company. So I started to learning about Agile and said, well, this makes a lot of sense. The way they manage, the way they work, the way they think makes a lot of sense. Why don't we try as well with the contact center? So I started trying some of the things they were doing in engineering in the contact center that I was managing. And, success came. Like people were happier, customers were happier, we reduced calls, we improved customer satisfaction, employee engagement, so all those things. So why do you think people should care? Because I think it's a fantastic way of managing a contact center. Perhaps not your traditional way, and we'll get into more detail, I'm sure, through the webinar today. But I think it's a fantastic way of thinking about how to manage your contact center using some of those mindsets and principles that came through engineering 20 years ago. I don't know if I've answered the question, Mark.
Eduardo, absolutely. And how interesting is it that Agile sparked all of these different innovations as well? Like we now talk about, an MVP, a minimum viable product, the most basic form of your product or service that you can offer in order to validate that the customer in fact has a need. Well, all of that stuff comes from the principles of iterating quickly. And it sounds like that's a core piece of what you get with Agile.
That's right. So I think at its core, Agile puts two things at the center. One, the customer, and two, the people of the organization. And that's not just Agile. I'll say that Lean does the same thing, or systems thinking does the same things. Or, as I said, I'm not an Agile evangelist. I'm not trying to convert anyone here, right? But they put those two things at the center. They put the customer and the people of the organization. So, when I think about contact centers, that's what they're there for. They're there, the first thing in mind is the customer. And the second, they use people in the organization to achieve the outcome. So how wonderful it is, that you can use it in a team like a contact center.
Wonderful. Now, Marcie, I know that when we've talked in the past, one of the points that you've made, I think our audience would love to hear about, is that if you're going to be implementing any sort of Agile approach in an organization or in your contact center, that it needs to start with leadership. Can you talk a little bit more about what the role of leadership has been at Spotify that helped you make different Agile changes in your organization?
Yeah. I think, everything is, and also just so that I don't get in trouble, I'm from Shopify. I'm not from Spotify.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We often get some of their support tickets, which is interesting, oddly enough. So you're not the only one. I think like anything, it does have to come from the leaders of the company, and Agile can be, it can be really difficult for some folks to want to get on board with, because it actually puts a lot of the action and decision making into the hands of more of the team lead. So it kind of takes it out of the hands of the executive leadership, who are often really accountable for things like service level and cost and efficiency and CSAT, those like really high level metrics, which I found, at least in a contact center, and Eduardo and I used to talk about this so much, was just like, if those are sort of the high level metrics that usually in a very senior leadership team or executive team is accountable for, you'd often see their KPIs disseminate downwards from there, which effectively just, it doesn't actually mean that the teams are in control of the outcome. It means that they're actually just trying to toggle the various sort of input metrics, or presumably like some of the leading indicators that you think would actually yield the outcome that you're responsible for. So when I say that it's a leadership approach, it really means that the leadership team has to spend so much more time, rather than solving the problem that they think is going to improve their efficiency or improve whatever these results that they're trying to get, and actually spend more time coming up with design principles and behavioral expectations, and training teams to actually adopt a way of thinking and a way of working, as opposed to just giving them the recipe. That's often what we would like. Cooking analogies work great for me, but it's about teaching people, how to make a great lasagna, as opposed to giving them the very explicit recipe on, here is exactly how I want you to produce it. And sometimes those results, almost always in my experience, those results are infinitely better when you're just clear about the approach first.
Wonderful. Now, Marcie, one of the things that you mentioned is about championing a way of working or a way of thinking. Can you give a couple of examples of how you as a leader have helped build that culture in your team?
Yeah, I know it's going to sound like it probably sounds really simple, but it's the easiest way for me to think about it is, I think especially in contact centers, we kind of get lost. There's so much data, especially behind the efficiency of our work, that it's really easy to get pulled into that sort of those binary metrics that we think that we can sort of throttle and move the needle on, and increase our efficiency. And the way that I would always try to approach it with my team is like, let's focus on doing the right thing instead of the thing right. And that can mean things like, at the end of the day, I also really believe that separating sort of operational output metrics are like more of a workforce planning problem, and the mindset that I wanted to in the people, like, this is this contact centers are a people business. They're not a numbers business. It's about creating, brand ambassadors and relationships and those types of, emotional impact that people have when they're interacting with your company. Your customer service folks are like the most important energy that comes from your business that way. And if you're directing them towards like, okay, so how do I strengthen this relationship with this customer? How do I actually, make them feel like they have the autonomy to make decisions on behalf of this customer, as opposed to what are all the things that I have to make sure that I don't do so that I don't increase my handle time, so that I don't accidentally give, an extra 15 cents on this refund. And I know there's probably like a lot of folks in here being like, that'll never happen in my contact center, but it's been my experience that as a leader, you really have to overemphasize that level of autonomy that people have, because your word is taken and held to the highest degree of scrutiny. And so if you mention anything around like efficiency, the risk, at least in my case, was that is the thing that gets over managed to, because it's so much easier and less ambiguous than things like experience and care and doing, like I said, doing the right thing doesn't have a check mark, but doing the thing right often does. So, trying to separate those two, which is why I was really quite drawn to the Agile way of working. I don't know if that makes sense though.
It does. Marcie, I heard you mention prioritizing autonomy, prioritizing relationships, prioritizing customer care and experience, and deprioritizing the check boxes.
Yeah.
How do you do that balance where you make sure that you are, in fact, hitting the core metrics that your contact center needs to hit, while at the same time making sure everyone's focus is on the thing that matters most?
Yeah, I wish that it's not a compelling answer, but like, okay, so if anybody here can tell me like the things that they expect of their employees, no ifs, ands, or buts, backwards, then you have a good enough list. But if you can't, then like there's 0% chance that any one of your frontline staff are actually going to be able to remember what those things are. So I used to say, like, for me personally, it's 4 things. Like if you stretch it to 5, I can never do it backwards, kind of thing. So the things that you want your employees to be accountable for, to actually be accountable for at their individual level, probably have to be very, very simple and something that they can have a lot of control and influence over. But if you're expecting them to remember things like next is issue resolution on like 2,000 topics, and I know that there's tons of technology to make this more efficient at the frontline level, but what that individual is truly responsible for has to be incredibly simple. And that's where it comes back to sort of your design principles of your contact center, as Eduardo said, being the drivers of that agile methodology, has to be incredibly simple and something that the human can actually do. Like, you and I can't control if a customer calls and has 26 questions. Their AHT is going to be just a write-off at that point on that contact. But what they can control is how they show up in that moment.
Yeah, it's almost like when you hear companies that have 200 company values, and you're like, oh, well, don't your associates remember all 200 company values? And it's like, nope. But if you can boil it down to just a few, it becomes much easier to keep top of mind.
Yeah, I mean, Eduardo will tell you this too. Like, it's when we were working together, there's this like creative tension between, okay, like how specific can we get so that we're giving folks all the tools to be really successful, but like telling people 12 principles, there's like no one's going to remember that. They're never going to hit all those check marks. People like to feel like they're being successful, so you really need to do your due diligence and in intense simplification, make all of those things that they're accountable for really accessible. And honestly, my own trick is like, I have to be able to say them backwards in order. Then I know it's like, you can actually kind of remember it.
Yeah. Sorry, Mark, I was going to add, in my mind, the key for the people, for the front line is quality. Like that would be the one thing that that will tell, you know, each contact center manager that people should focus on. So the quality of the interaction with the customer. Don't worry about, you know, average handle time. Don't worry about number of calls. Make sure you deliver good quality experience. And, you know, every company will have some ethos or DNA or what they want to be known for. I know in the Shopify was, you know, that very friendly, you know, customer first, which a lot of companies now want as well. But well, make sure that your frontline deliver that, you know, that friendliness, that helpful, being helpful for the customer, you know, being there for the customer, going the extra mile. So focus on that quality. And I always say it's the manager's job to then hit those numbers, the traditional numbers of the contact center. It's not the associates, it's not the frontline, it's the managers, and the way we build the system around it. So they are the responsibles, not the people on the front line.
Yes. Yes. So let's pose a little challenge to the audience here. Everybody, if you would mind either in the chat or using the little raise hand button, let's do the raise hand button. Raise your hand if you would, if you're familiar with the term failure demand. Let me look and see among our audience about how many we're getting. Let's see. The term is failure demand. All right, not many at all. So Eduardo, that's actually a really interesting part of the approach and methodology you've taken. Would you mind telling everyone a little bit about what failure demand really means and, you know, what its importance is in the contact center?
Yeah, and goes back to, I think, exactly the point that we were talking about, you know, that at the end, it's part of the manager's responsibility, mind to hitting those numbers. So when as I said, when I first started working in contact centers, I didn't have experience in the contact center. So I didn't come from the traditional sort of career, if you like. So I started looking at different ways and different approaches of what made sense for me at the time. And one of the things that I realized is that contact centers were managing a lot of numbers and a lot of stats. And usually those were when the interaction happens. So how many calls do we get? How, you know, what's the average handle time? What's the after call time? But there wasn't not a lot of information that managers were managing to understand why those contacts were coming in the first place. So we, as contact center world, we try to manage calls or contacts rather than manage customers. So that was sort of my first realization. And let's say if we get 100 calls, you know, per day, in most cases will be, you know, the 1,000. How many calls were you getting per day? How many contacts, Marcie, were you getting per day at your time when you were there? Do you remember?
About 10,000.
10,000 contacts, right? So let's use the 10,000 number. So if we're getting 10,000 contacts per day, how many of those contacts are contacts that the customer actually don't want to make? And it's because something went wrong that they need to contact us. So for example, I'm going to use an example. If I have, you know, a mobile phone with a provider, and they send me the wrong invoice, the wrong bill at the end of the month, what I'm going to do is I'm going to contact, you know, the provider, the company, and say, hey, you made a mistake. You need to reimburse me, you know, $50 because you make that mistake, right? So that's what I call a failure call. I think we call it something different at Shopify. And again, it's not that you need to use this wording, it's just the concept, right? But if I see an ad, for example, for, you know, broadband or something, or a bundle from the same company, and I call them, say, hey, I want to upgrade, I want to, you know, that would be a value call, right? Rather than a failure call. So my advice to contact center managers has always been, as a management team, make sure that you're focusing on reducing that amount of failure calls that you're receiving in the contact center. Don't worry so much about how much time your frontline people spend with those calls, but you focus on reducing the number they get. So if instead of 10,000, they get 9,000, because you've removed 1,000 calls that your customers don't want to make, your folks, your associates, your frontline will have much more capacity to manage those 9,000 calls. Or, you can reduce the number of heads, whatever you want to, however you want to play it. If it's a growing business, you might want to maintain the number of people, or if it's a business that is not growing, you don't need that many people to manage, those customers, those calls, right? So I'll say that 95% of the failure calls that a contact center receives are not caused by the contact center. They caused by somewhere else in the organization. Might be the IT department, the marketing, the finance, the operations, whatever it is. It's going to be someone else. The only percentage that is created by the contact center is the ones where we provided the wrong advice, the wrong answer, and then the customer needs to contact us again because someone provided the wrong advice. That's why I said before, I think it's very important for contact center managers to focus on quality. The better quality we provide, the less repeat calls we're going to get. All right. So to me, the responsibility of reducing the number of calls and having a much more manageable operations sits with the managers on working with the business on reducing the number of calls or contacts coming in, rather than putting pressure on the people in the contact center about, you need to answer faster, or you need to get onto the call faster after you finish, because that's the way we're going to hit our numbers. I think the way contact center managers are going to hit their numbers, the grade of service or whatever, it is by reducing the number of calls that come in. Hopefully that was a good explanation, Mark.
It was. And Eduardo, when you and I talked on the Reimagining the Contact Center podcast, one of the highlights you mentioned is that you were able to reduce call volume by 40% while the business was growing by 30%. So what sort of steps, if you're a contact center leader and you say, okay, cool, sounds great, I want to start trying this out. What are the sort of steps you might take as that contact center leader to put this into place?
Look, you can get very sophisticated with this. I'm sure, there's some IT folks on the call or watching this later, and they can say we can build a system that, can track the number of failure calls and can give you all sorts of stats and things like that. But I'll say you can try tomorrow. Like if you're a contact center manager, just grab 10 people in your front line, and tell them this concept. Talk to them about this concept and ask them, what are the 5 top calls that you think are failure demand coming into the contact center? They know because they're taking them every day. The thing is that traditionally, we don't get them thinking about that. We didn't get them thinking about finishing the call faster, or jumping on the call. We don't get them thinking about this concept of failure demand or failure interactions, right? So if you ask your frontline and say, hey, give me the 5 top reasons of calls we get like this, they'll tell you. And then what you need to do as a manager is say, okay, well, this one was, I don't know, this one started in marketing. I'm just playing this up. It's because we send the wrong letters to our customers every month. And therefore we get so many calls from customers saying, hey, I got the wrong letter, blah, blah, blah. Well, as a manager, you know what you need to do, to the next is talk to marketing. And then show them, say, look, we've received, 3,000 calls or contacts every month because of these letters that you're sending. And this is costing us, I'm sure we can equate to a dollar number here. If we've got 3,000 calls, it equates to X number of dollars, X number of people. And then people start listening in the organization. So then the contact center manager or the contact center in general, rather than becoming a cost center or something that is sort of at the end of the chain in an organization, becomes a source of information from customers directly to the organization. I know this, in the contact center that I was managing, but also with Shopify. Like Marcie had a very strong profile within Shopify with the product and engineering team. and her team, because when they wanted to know information, what was working, what wasn't working, what were complaining, what were not, they were going to her because she knew what was working. And Shopify, amazing in a way of putting things in the market. So I'll say that most companies will have at least more than 50% failure demand coming into the contact center right now.
50%.
Yeah, at least. I'll say at least, and maybe we can ask the folks on the call later.
Yeah.
But that's been my experience, right? Now you can't get to zero. If you have zero, you're dead as a business. Means you're not trying new things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having zero is not good either, because you're not trying new things. You're not putting things in the market. But trying to reduce it from 50 to 30, for example, you're winning. You're making a lot of progress in there.
Huge.
But
Absolutely.
the
huge.
metrics folks that we have on the call, like one that I did find really helpful in this perspective was to look at our contacts per customer. In our case, it was merchants. So while you would actually sometimes see, like Eduardo, you had a really absolute reduction from 10,000 down to 9,000, but with like your percentage thresholds. One thing I did use to monitor to see if like the combination of both reducing failure demand through a product feedback loop and a redirection to our self-help, like our help center, so documentation, like those are going to be the two things that would drive down your contacts per customer. So even if you're experiencing a ton of growth, which I hope everybody is, you would just see those number of contacts per customer overall start to reduce their ratios.
That's right. In my consultant speak, if you like, what Marcie just said, we call it, failure demand is what I explained. Low value would be things that you don't need a person, to answer, and high value. And the high value is the ones that you really want a person answering or talking to your customer. Low value, you try to redirect manage channels, things like that, But the high value, these are the ones that it doesn't matter how long your associates, your frontline spend with those customers. They probably are complex issues that they need some time to understand and help.
Yes, absolutely. So, Marcie, one of the really interesting things you've done at Shopify is the idea of a self-organizing team. And one of the things we've talked about historically is how it had a pretty astounding impact on both the productivity and the employee happiness. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, no problem. And I will also say, like, for as much of a utopia as that sounds like there was all the warts as well with how, it wasn't by no means perfect. But yeah, like, I think the most important thing was just, we had a lot of values around how teams came together and how they spent their time together. So this, like, we value small teams, like autonomous teams of like 8 to 10 people, so that they can actually work with a team. I think what I have heard of other contact centers experiencing is like a very one-to-one relationship, employee to team lead. Whereas if you have small teams, like you can actually build a team where they can support one another. And then what's really great is, and the sort of things that I think I might have talked about seeing happening is like you're genuinely interested in seeing your peers succeed. And it's not like, it's not just who's on the leaderboard and can I beat Eduardo with my metrics. Eduardo and I would, in theory, have a vested interest in seeing one another succeed, because what mattered is that the team actually won. So we're sharing best practices, but you also have to create that environment they don't just like happen. So you have to build these teams really deliberately. We tried to, actually, the way that we did our scheduling, and some folks thought it was really inefficient, and it is really inefficient, but we always scheduled the same people together in their team. So we did actually run on higher capacity at certain hours of the day, because we scheduled the same folks with the same team always. So you always had your same group. We gave consistency to hours. So, they were always starting their shift at the same time. We gave them a consistent 6 or 8 week rotation, depending on what their team decided worked best for them, but they decided that together. And so they always knew their schedule for that period of time. We optimized for giving as much 2 consecutive days off. So we put a lot of effort into designing the environment for these teams to flourish. So they're not worried all the time about trading shifts and like what time they're starting and who they're working with and can they count on the people that they're also working with. Like they are working with their team, and there was that level of accountability and winning for the team. Like the team actually had team-based metrics as well.
Marcie, with that approach, did you notice any benefits to being able to recruit talent?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also say like Shopify has a pretty great employer brand too, so that definitely helps when it comes to recruiting. But I think what we saw was just the exorbitant amount of referrals, and we saw a ton of upward attrition into the rest of the company. And again, it's like kind of difficult to run a successful contact center when you're experiencing so much attrition, regardless of if it's into the company or out of the company. It's still attrition for your contact center. But I think the system of work that we developed certainly helped, but the fact that we promoted that internal movement, and it's great for the company. It makes the whole company better to have the frontline perspective just littered throughout the entire company, which is great. But I think that really helped as well. Like when and I think people enjoyed their career when they were there for sure with the folks that they worked with. And I think it was a very different environment, especially in the contact center and customer service world.
Eduardo, what sort of wins have you seen with self-organizing teams, and what sort of warts should different contact centers be aware of if they were thinking about implementing that sort of approach?
Yeah, I was just thinking while Marcie was answering. So I think one of the main principles of Agile is about trust, right? Like you want to move faster because you're putting trust within your team, an engineering team, or in this case, a contact center team. So the more decisions you let them take, I think it's going to be better. The more autonomy you give them is going to be better for them. I think, if we treat people like kids, they're going to behave like kids. But if we treat people like adults and we give them autonomy, they're going to behave like adults. So when I was going back to my first contact center gig, and it was a smaller team. We're not talking about the numbers that Marcie was talking just before, but it was under 100 people contact center. But the people did their own rosters. I didn't have a workforce management person working for me. They decided when they want to work and come, and they organized themselves. I mean, we gave them that system. We designed that system of work so they could take those decisions, but they were taking those decisions themselves. We didn't take them when they take the breaks either. They were deciding that. Like that's something that was very shocking for me when I came into this world, that we told people when they could, go for a toilet break, right? So it's like, well, we can't do that. We need to give these people the autonomy to take those basic decisions themselves. So once you start putting more and more decision making within the front line, the brain starts to switch on. If you give me everything, I'm going to just switch off my brain and you keep feeding me and I'll do whatever you tell me to do. So it's about giving them more and more things. They need to switch their brain on, therefore they're more engaged. So I've seen, engagement going, points and points up when you start applying these approaches, these mindset, those principles. Once the engagement goes up, people don't leave, you don't get unwanted churn, employee brand, starts being successful, referrals, like was Marcie talking. You don't have to be replacing, your frontline all the time. Therefore, that knowledge that you had goes, and the recruitment costs. So in my mind, there's a lot of benefits of doing this, Mark, financial, because you're not spending on recruiting, you're not losing the knowledge that you had in the team. Your frontline spends or stays more and more within the contact center than they were before.
Brilliant. Now, Marcie, can you think of any examples that come to mind for you of decisions that you have given the frontline the autonomy to make that might be counterintuitive or not so common?
So I think it's not that it was, the approach wasn't like, here, these are the decisions that you make, because that's also just probably a little bit too prescriptive. It was more or less like we didn't talk about how long it should take them to accomplish something. We had a pretty high threshold on like refunds and stuff like that. We didn't monitor like number of escalations per I'm like, I want to make sure, I'm about to say our own name, which is our Shopify advisors, but I'll say agents because I think that's more universal. But yeah, so it's not so much like what we said, here's where you can make decisions. It was sort of like, here's some of the highest level parameters of where, and then anything else, like just go for it, and so there was no, we're expecting you to do like 3 out of 10 upsells or anything like that. It's just that they could do whatever they wanted. They could speak however they wanted. They could refer whatever they wanted. They could take 2 minutes or 10 minutes if they wanted. It didn't really matter to us one way or the other, like whatever they felt was the right thing for that conversation.
Yeah, so that actually takes us wonderfully to our last topic here of the webinar, and that is the idea of a system of work. Eduardo, one of the things you've mentioned is that getting the system of work right can change everybody's mindset on the team. And when you and I had our podcast interview, you talked about the idea of just simply changing the term open tickets to customers waiting for us. Visually, open tickets to customers waiting for us. And that small change made a huge impact. So can you talk a little bit about what a system of work is and what some of the different pieces are that might go into it that could impact revenue or customer satisfaction or any of the metrics contact centers care about?
Yeah, we call it system of work, and I think we've used that term a few times during this webinar. So system of work is how we as managers design how the contact center works. Yeah, so all the elements, all the different elements of the contact center and how they work. From small one, as you said, a very small example when I started managing contact centers, and they had a panel there and said tickets to be answered or something like that, and I said, what do you mean tickets to be answered? Is that customers waiting for us? He said, yeah, well, you change that, that little change, make people think, hang on, that's a bit more personal than tickets, to be responded, and that makes it more customer centric. So that's a little example, but there's plenty. Everything, how you design everything, is about system of work. So if we're talking, for example, about trust, and providing autonomy to the contact center frontline, but then you design a QA approach where people need to checklist and say 4 times the customer name and and blah blah blah, then you're not really delivering on that trust and autonomy you're talking about, right? So how you design every single aspect of your contact center is going to tell your agents that yes, you are doing what you're saying or not. Another principle in Agile is about collaboration. For example, it's very important to collaborate as a team, and I think Marcie just touched on that very briefly at the beginning. But if we're talking about that, collaboration is important. But then we have individual KPIs for each one of the, agents or in the contact center, we're sending a wrong message. So can we design a system where perhaps it's not an individual, but more a team-based KPIs? So that's, again, another way you can send a very clear message to your team that you are about something, in this case, about having more collaboration. Yeah. We want teams to collaborate, but if at the end of the day, the salary or the bonus or their rating depends on what they do individually, they're not going to collaborate as much, right? So all these things, how you design the system of work. One of my, I guess, I try to, again, to tell contact centers, is it called IVR as well in the US? Like the press one for this, press two for that, make as simple as possible for customers. Even don't have it. I've achieved this with some contact centers. Just talk to someone. I don't know. I haven't met anyone that likes to press buttons and talk to someone before they talk to someone for 2 minutes, right? So make it very simple. That shows that you care about the customer and you care about the customer experience, right? So every decision that as managers we take on how we design the contact center matters then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Eduardo and Marcie, before we transition to the Q&A, we all know sometimes on webinars, you're kind of forcing the questions out of the audience. So everyone get your questions ready if you have them. The last question I'd like to pose to both of you is, when someone in the audience is hearing, focus on quality, focus on collaboration, don't focus on handle time, don't focus on efficiency. They must be thinking, geez, my metrics are just gonna, tank and go in the wrong direction. What has your guys' experience been there? Because that's definitely, I'm sure there's some trade-offs that you've experienced in implementing this sort of more autonomous approach.
Yes. I'm not saying that those things don't matter. I'm saying that they matter at the right level of abstraction in the right hands of ownership. And so when, a key member of our entire contact center team or support team was our workforce planning manager. And you can have, I am a firm believer that understanding your contact volumes and your handle times and your peaks and your troughs in terms of, when that volume is happening, all matters. They're all operational metrics. That is not the responsibility of the frontline folks. And what I would really want is people who understand how to speak to people and how to form human relationships and have, the part of the business where it was like humans talking to humans, leading humans, forming human relationships, and then matching your call times and, staffing to appropriate peak levels and managing your service levels and understanding your average call times or chat times and concurrencies, and all of that is all operational stuff. And the teams need to talk together at that high level of abstraction, but not at the frontline level. And that's one of my very firm beliefs on how to make sure that I'm not saying that those metrics don't matter. I'm saying they matter, but they matter in a different part of your business.
From my side, when we help businesses implement these approaches, it's always worked. We've always seen, call volumes go down. We've always seen customer satisfaction go up and employee engagement go up. I think the key is that it is a paradigm shift. It is about thinking a traditional way of managing a contact center differently. And it takes brave leaders to do that. So Marcie is one of those brave leaders that say there must be a different way to do this. And she had even people in her team saying, no, let's just do the normal way. Let's just do the traditional way. But she had that firm belief that no, she wanted to manage in a different way. So what you need is brave leaders that believe that there's a different way of running contact centers.
Eduardo, that's a great point to conclude us out. So we'll do the conclusion here. And while I'm wrapping up, please, if you do have questions, put them here in the chat and we'll get to them. And actually, we do have a question that just came in. And the first one is, how do we learn more about Agile beyond this webinar? And Eduardo or Marcie, feel free to jump in on that one.
I'll say probably, of course I'm biased, but, if you visit our website, the Agile Contact Centre.com.au, the Agile Contact Centre.com.au is a good place to start. Sean, who is on this call in the background, is the director of that part of the business. And I know he's very generous with his time. And if you see there's plenty of information there that you can download for free. The issues or the warning I'll give you to the person that asked the question is a lot of Agile out there and a lot of software development Agile and a lot of methodologies like Scrum and things like that I think they missed a little bit the mark of what we're talking today here. So I'll say a good place to start would be the Agile Contact Center website, which I think Julian just put on the chat. And reach out to Sean. He's very generous with his time and his knowledge as well. So we're always happy to help contact center folks to jump into this wagon.
Eduardo, that's wonderful. And I love, by the way, how you said a few times, you said, I'm not an Agile evangelist. I'm not trying to, convert anybody here. I think that's so important because you hear a lot of folks, when they think of Agile, they almost think dogma. They almost think you must do things in this exact way, in this exact process, with these methodologies, this is right and this is wrong. And I think what is so enlightening that you've done is you've drawn inspiration from the Agile approach. You've taken some of the principles from the Agile approach, but you're not trying to turn a contact center into an engineering team.
Definitely not. And definitely is not about shoehorning a methodology or a framework that might work well with an engineering team. It's taking those mindsets and principles and make them work for your team. Absolutely right.
One thing I might suggest, and we might have folks who are at varying degrees of readiness for this, is just like you can even teach yourself or sort of assess yourself, even by Googling the difference between waterfall and Agile and seeing just sort of trying to plot yourself and thinking where do I fit with my team in these two models and these two ways of working. And then you probably need to ask yourself a few questions like, am I ready for a different approach? Do I feel like I trust my leaders? Do I have an engaged team? Like all these types of questions that can be really difficult to turn the mirror onto yourselves as a big leader of a company. And then when you start to kind of compare those two frameworks, Agile and Waterfall, and see what would work well for you and your leadership style, I would say that's also a really good place to start to own some of your own discovery on readiness for this.
Fantastic. Well, we've all listened to a million bazillion webinars this past year. And I got to say, I think this was one of the best panels I've heard. So thank you so much, Eduardo. Thank you so much, Marcie. Everyone, some closing notes. We will post the recording to this in Balto's YouTube channel, and we'll send you an email. And you can check out Eduardo's interview on Reimagine the Contact Center podcast. Just put it right there in the chat. We actually have an episode next week on Reimagine the Contact Center with Zappos. So keep your eyes out for that one. That'll be a good one. And then Sean, you have an event coming up on the Agile Contact Center side. Do you want to say a quick bit about that?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And good morning, everyone. Sean McGinn, Director of the Agile Contact Centre, work with Eduardo. We have an event coming up, 29th of April. I think it's probably not too bad a time for you guys in North America, probably late evening. But we're talking to a client that we worked with who's turned around their employee engagement and improved, saw a 24% improvement in their employee engagement in 6 months, doing a lot of things that you heard today. So if you want to learn more and get to ask questions of this leader and their team, then come along because it'll be well worth it.
Sounds great. Improve employee engagement, grab a glass of wine, hang out in the late evening, and attend this event. It's going to be awesome. Thank you all again. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye, folks.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
And thank you, everyone.
Bye, thanks.